Hi there. This is an intentionally short preview of a much longer, hour-long breakdown that I want to do on something that recently came up in the news again. The disagreements between George R.R. Martin and showrunner Ryan Condal on the HBO show House of the Dragon. Now, this really hasn't changed since 7 months ago when Martin made his blog posts about it, but because filming was starting again, Condal, in a pretty neutral way, finally publicly acknowledged, yes, we're not really speaking with each other, we had a disagreement, and it is beyond just the production problems, which were not Condal's fault, and people keep pointing to about that there was a last-minute episode reduction, they weren't allowed to do rewrites. Those are the bigger factors, but for whatever reason, Martin got really hung up on a creative difference, and Martin's probably right about that. But why are so many fans saying, channel creators anyway, like Red Team Review, Fenton D. Charles, me, others saying, well, we disagree with Condal George, but the distinction is he seems like he was acting in good faith, and there are things that a TV show needs that, again, in Condal's position, I would not do, but as a rational person, I see why he felt he needed to. This isn't cynically for his own gain. And the distinction is, no, this is not like Benioff and Weiss when we realized they're just rushing this because they want to jump ship to go to Star Wars, and I realize they're showing off actors to win awards. Condal is doing what he thinks is best for the show, even though I feel I would tell him to his face, no, this is not in your best interest, you shouldn't keep pushing for this, but there are other pressures and the HBO higher-ups yelling at him. I hope he backs down eventually. And we've been discussing this behind the scenes. I will not have my full thought on that this week because I'm terrified, as many of you are. And because of that, I trust what other channels are saying more, like Red Team Review and Preston Jacobs. I've been talking to them, Carmine, through private messages behind the scenes all week, and he said, well, we're working on a big podcast about this. And like I said in my last video, I will defer to what they say about this. So next weekend, I'll make my follow-up. This is controversial enough that I want to follow up with my own long form after everyone else does, but I pretty much agree with what they're saying about this. But one thing that came up in discussion behind the scenes with Carmine, Red Team Review, I didn't think he remembered this or was aware of it because it was a while ago. I said, oh, this is a lot like that thing that happened. This isn't, oh, Condal's being very unusual. This is a constant tension in the adaptation process. And while all of us disagree with Condal, we think he's not acting in his own self-interest. We think it was a little harsh to disown him like this, and just the rhetoric from the online toxic fandom yelling at him and everything. No, I can disagree with someone with nuance to it. I told Carmine, this reminds me of what happened back in Sopranos Season 1 on HBO. Specifically when Tony killed the snitch Fabian Petrulio. Remember that? It was this big famous thing in the first season of The Sopranos. It was episode 5. The title is College. And, just same network, same cable thing. Episode 6, the one after that, was actually directed by Alan Taylor. He was a Sopranos director back in the day, but he didn't direct this one. Episode 5, College, on Sopranos. Tony kills a snitch by garroting him. He strangles him to death. He's taking his daughter on a college admissions tour, a car trip. By pure coincidence, he spots a snitch who's in the witness protection program. And he decides he has to kill him. Now, I referred to this before. TV critic Maureen Ryan made this amazing behind-the-scenes book, Burn It Down, in summer of 2023, which goes over a lot of this behind-the-scenes wrangling. It's one of the most enlightening ones. It's not just the spin, but the real discussions going behind the scenes. And I'm going to read that off straight because it explains this. There was a heavy disagreement and back and forth between showrunner David Chase and the HBO executives that Chase felt was compromising his artistic vision, but at the same time he acknowledged that their concerns were reasonable even though he disagrees with them to this day. Let me read this off. But artists and artisans should also be allowed to try new things, to take chances, and to try things to see if they work. Every commercial artistic endeavor is an attempt to balance profit-seeking with aesthetic coherence and ambition, and with ambition comes the occasional failure, miscalculation, or mistake. Part of making a show is experimenting, and sometimes story ideas don't work. The missteps and mistakes are a necessary aspect of learning and evolution. Even David Chase, creator of The Sopranos, regretted slightly altering the show's lauded college episode in which Tony kills a mob snitch on the college tour. The HBO executives were afraid the audience might lose interest in a lead character who could do something so brutal. After much debate, the murder stayed in. They didn't want to murder him at all. Chase said he has to kill him. That was a fundamental disagreement, whether to kill him or not. But Chase inserted a scene as a compromise that showed the snitch dealing drugs, and when he realized Tony saw him, he attempts to hire a hitman first, out of fear for his life, to kill him and his daughter, but Tony gets to him first. And the 1999 episode, which won a Writing Emmy, is seen as a landmark moment in TV history that helped launch TV's anti-hero-focused golden age. But the alteration never sat right with Chase. And this is a recent interview in the 2020s. I don't think it was a terrible compromise. Chase acknowledges, I don't think it was a terrible compromise, but it was a compromise. He said in an interview for the book Difficult Men, and I still wish we hadn't done it. And that's not even the end of the story, because there's this whole discussion about this. When they later put out the Sopranos script book, in the scripts that he submitted to HBO and the way they originally filmed it was even more of a compromise. Because in the original version, which they did film, after Tony is garroting him from behind, he has a gun in his hand, he orders Fabian drop the gun. He seems more threatening to Tony. They have a longer conversation about, well, yeah, when he's pleading, I have kids, have Tony point out other guys had kids who went to jail. There's a point where Tony relaxes his grip. You know, the whole thing they always do of, let's whitewash the scene, where have Shay go for the knife first was a terrible idea and not comparable to this. But that thing where they go, make sure the bad guy was going for the gun so the hero is blameless for killing him. There's a point where Tony relaxes his grip enough and hesitates that Fabian starts trying to struggle to get away, and then he kills him. You can tell from the way they edited it, watch a clip on YouTube, that in the editing room, Chase went back and removed any hint that this was anything other than an execution, that Tony is killing him. And even in the final version, Tony makes it clear, you took an oath, other men stuck with that oath, that what kind of man breaks omerta? What kind of man goes to the DEA? Really? That in context, it entirely made sense. I mean, anyone watching Sopranos has seen The Godfather. They know what that is, the honor code. That just how much HBO was worried this will alienate people from him. And Chase has said in other interviews, I see why they asked this, that where is there for his character arc to go in later seasons if he's already brutally murdering someone? This came out later, but think of Breaking Bad. There's things that Walter White in season 5 does that would have been a mistake for him to be murdering people in season 1 because it's meant to be a character arc. I get that. And I'm siding with the creators here, but the point of this video is, on these other high-profile projects, like The Sopranos itself, this very famous episode at the very start of the show, the creator acknowledges that the executives had a valid point that he disagrees with fundamentally, and was willing to compromise with, and doesn't think it's a terrible compromise. It's not terrible that they asked for this, but it's still a mistake. And I think the fundamental problem we're facing on House of the Dragon, Season 2, that's not a production issue but a story issue, Occam's razor, the most simple, is that they want to soften the characters so they're likable. that in many cases that it's not them doing something utterly ruthless. Rhaenyra, Allison, Daemon, they're framed as mistakes, and Blood and Cheese was a mistake in the book where it says we thought he was going after Aegon. But at a certain point, the bridges are burned. That there has to be a point where Rhaenyra and Alicent totally turn on each other and are embracing what they're doing, and they're not morally blameless. And how many other shows have done this? This was I would use to list off, oh, well, you want them to be likable. Was Walter White likable? Was Tony Soprano likable? Even Tony Soprano, there were debates about how much was too much. My criticism is that House of the Dragon overcorrected for this. And maybe it's the studio forcing it on them because we don't know what the private discussions are, in which case I feel really bad for Condal that he's under these pressures. And no, if even the author is arguing in favor, openly saying these things, which is a little, you're yelling in public like this, I think he can, but Condal can't defend himself from vague warnings of the future. Seems a bit unfair. I wish they'd just openly say what they disagree about, then we could have a better frame of reference. But this is going back to the Tony Soprano thing, and it is so weird to see them talking about, well, you have to keep them likable. The Penguin had a brutal ending. The man is a sociopath, as played by Colin Farrell, but at the same time understandable. It's a character study. And there's so many script books and things that say people sympathize with characters who have agency. And if you remove their agencies, they're not responsible for the things happening around them. They're morally blameless, but also hapless, which somehow also makes people think, well, they're just buffoons stumbling around, not really affecting anything. So I dashed this off. There's going to be a more advanced video coming where I'm responding next weekend to the bigger, better report that Carmine and Preston are putting out, but this is a tension that is always in adaptations, and I am furious with the studio for budget cuts, for the kind of pressuring of, well, you need to keep people likable if that's being applied to Condal. But we can't just have the childish name-calling that we've seen, which isn't really getting at the heart of the problem, that it's, what you're just blaming the showrunners because they're the face of the show, rather than the complex studio politics. I side with Martin. It's difficult for me to tell how fair he's being. Maybe he was in a bad mental state, and earlier this year a close friend had died. I don't know, but we cannot, as professionals, easily judge Condal for things that are happening in private that we don't have all the evidence for. And when I say judge, I mean vilify. I disagree with where he is doing certain character points, and I wish he'd listen. He doesn't feel, in good faith, he feels he's doing the right thing. But they aren't going to listen to fan complaints if we aren't having measured, mature responses, and it's just toxic fandom obeying memes. But the point is, these are pressures and debates that have been going on since even the golden age of Sopranos Season 1. And the showrunner on Sopranos said, I understand why they did this, even though I still disagree with them to this day.